The original concept for Red Delicious was something I see a lot when I go to the grocery store. It's a tray of apples that are set on pressed paper. And the idea was that each of the triplets would be curled up, sort of apple-shaped, and setting in one of these trays. The apple concept on the trays it worked with my gut, but it wasn't working with everybody's gut, so we just kind of started ruminating on other ideas.
Something about either them being in a car full of apples or in a cart full of apples, something involving lots of legs and big piles of apples, basically. And it just kind of kept living in this place of like, we'll figure it out, we'll figure it out. And there was finally this point where Allison was like, I have to buy costumes, and you have to tell me something because we're gonna have nothing to do.
Let's go back to this original sketch that you made and see if we can work with that. And I'm not quite sure why, but suddenly the energy came back into that idea.
Red Delicious is actually this really American apple. It's red, it's shiny, but it's all about surface. And so it makes sense to have this skin that's, kind of perfect looking and sexy.
Costume-wise, it was about sort of finding these red latex suits, which we were able to have custom built.
Oh gosh, those latex suits, you just don't want to touch yourself, It's like, okay, slip into this plastic bag and see how you feel.
And rather than having it have to be a stop with a canvas, whether it's more like these are little canvases. Kelly and I kind of went with this idea of trying to figure out how to make a crate, which was a whole another problem, making this human size thing that looked like felt and paper that was the right color and size and shape. And she started making this foam bowl.
I came up with this idea of using this wall insulation foam and layering that up, cutting it into a circle with a beveled edge and just keep layering it.
And then we were going to texture it to look like paper, and basically it became this huge paper mache bowl.
The struggles with that was the drying time of that paper clay. There was one edge on the bottom that just was not drying, so we couldn't paint it.
Sometime when she was so tired, she was clearly in tears, and I think all she really wanted to do was curl up and go to sleep. She had to rip the whole thing out, start over again, in time for the shoot the next day. And to her credit, she stuck with it, toughed it out, and we ended up with, it wasn't perfect, but we were able to work with it.
Oh yeah, that was a super fun day.
What we call post-production on Red Delicious is the assembling of all these images, and we had hundreds and hundreds of these images. My wife Babs, who just has a talent for building complex images, decided she'd take this on. I think she regretted it fairly quickly. It was almost like starting the whole process again, where each photograph was essentially a brushstroke in a painting. The biggest fear is you have to undo big sections of it before you can make it work. But she was very patient, very organized. We got to a point where we had, I'd say 3 or 4 versions that were fairly close that we liked, final bit of tweaking, and then it went to Rick Kyle.
Red Delicious was the most time I ever spent on one image and ended up being the largest file I've ever worked on. The time-consuming part was, well, the whole thing was time-consuming.
Imagine if you have all these photographs and they're roughly the same color, but the lighting on the surface is a little uneven. And then when you rotate them, the tiling becomes more dramatic. So his challenge was to smooth the edges and blend them so it was believable that this was a continuous surface.
As I built one out, I flattened it, and then built another one out, flattened it. But even just one of the triptychs being layered, it was almost 9 gigs.
The net result is a triptych very different than the others in that it kind of feels like a stained glass window. There's a feeling of advertising, there's a feeling of sexuality, and it just gets your mind thinking about what are the stories contained in this picture.